So we continue to get really interesting indications out of the 2024 race. Harry Enton, who really has done a good job crunching the numbers over at CNN, did a segment recently about just how close this race is, which has been kind of the steady state for a number of weeks now. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
How much do the state poll averages miss by? All right. The average error since 1972 in the close races in those battleground states we've been looking at, 3.4 points. 3.4 points. Every single state, all 7 of those key battleground states are within 3.4 points. What's the chance for an even larger error? You know, we talk about the margin of error, right? So what is that 95% confidence interval? What is that true margin of error? 5% of errors in state polling averages are off by more than 9.4 points. These battleground states are well within that. I want you to remember this number because the bottom line is this race is going to be too close to call almost certainly all the way to Election Day. It's definitely going to be within this interval, and it's most likely going to be within this interval. So the bottom line is the state polling averages tell us what it tells us is it's just a race that is too close to call.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense, Saagar. When you look at the Trump era, you have 2016, extremely close election. 2018 midterms, very close election. 2020, extremely close election. 2022, Democrats did what? That was a weird one because you had Democrats doing really well in certain states and then Republicans surging in Florida and New York in particular. Nate Cohn over the New York Times, his theory of the case is basically that the election is shaping up to look a lot like the 2022 midterms. That would have huge implications also for the popular vote advantage, an electoral college advantage that the Republicans have. It would actually narrow that gap. But the bottom line is that if the polls are off 3 points in one way, you get a Trump landslide in terms of the Electoral College. If they're off 3 points the other way, you get a Kamala landslide in the Electoral College. All those things are on the table. And in spite of all of the wild twists and turns that we have seen throughout this campaign, since Kamala came in and kind of rose to the position that she's at right now, it has basically been stable.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the fascinating part. In fact, this morning I was reading a lot of Democratic activists who were talking to Axios about their consternation that they've thrown almost $300 million of advertising into the blue wall states so far, with the reserved another $300 million coming, even just in the state of Pennsylvania. And they have seen basically no movement whatsoever. Right. So the dollar figure, like I said, previously comparing it to Coca-Cola, we know that if it wasn't there, it would have an impact. But we do know that its presence, we're not really sure what that impact is. Now, to build on this theory, because this is a little bit complicated, but everybody stick with us. Let's put the next one, please, up on the screen from the Wall Street Journal. More Americans identify as Republican than Democrat. Now, as they say, here's what that means for the election. Now, this could mean that there would be a narrower Trump-Harris margin in the popular vote, but does not necessarily mean that Trump will win the Electoral College. This is complicated, but just stick with us. The reason why is that just because more Americans identify as Republican, if Trump wins Florida by 13 points, which was the New York Times has, as opposed to the 3 points that he won back in 2020, it doesn't make all that much of a difference in the Electoral College.
Because it was going red anyway.
Right, it's going red anyway, and you win the electoral votes no matter what. But let's say that the margin for Harris drops in Texas, goes up in Texas, goes down in Florida, all these other places. Like, for example, Trump is doing rallies in Coachella in California. He's doing a rally in Madison Square Garden, which is 28 days to Election Day. I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of electoral sense, but what we know from both of those things is that you're watching the margins of victory for Republicans go up in traditionally blue states and probably go up even more in the Sun Belt. The problem that they accurately point out is that in 2022, even though Republican identification was very, very high, and in fact beat Democrats on the generic ballot, it's that all of the swing voters broke so hard for the Democrats, it was able to put the Democratic candidates up over the margin of victory. So just because Republicans have a major ballot advantage here does not mean that they will win. Again, I understand that this is counterintuitive, but the thing is that more Americans identifying as Republican actually just means there are less swing voters. So in some ways, that's good. It means that you have people who are explicitly like partisan they're going to come out and they're going to vote for you, but it will not take you across the finish line. You still need to win the swing voters.
Yeah.
And if the swing voters break in the same way they did in 2022, you will lose every single one of the swing states.
I mean, the TLDR of this is that the Electoral College is really stupid because it makes no sense that if you win a bunch more voters in Florida or California or in New York, that it literally does not matter at all. But that's the reality. I mean, all indications are that Republicans have improved their position in New York, but Democrats are still going to win New York.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that helps to juice your popular vote totals. It does not matter at all in terms of the electoral outcome. That's a stupid situation. Like, it should not be the case that what voters think in New York doesn't matter at all versus what voters think in Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania in particular. But that's a system that we have. So, this again is what Nate Cohn has been writing about over at the New York Times, and I encourage you to go read because it's a very interesting analysis. There's something else that ties into this that I'll do my best to explain. But basically, the idea is that Trump is picking up a lot of voters in those two states in particular, Florida and New York. So that means that he is narrowing, that helps to narrow that Electoral College edge, which means that when you're seeing these national polls that have Kamala Harris up 3 points or even up 2 points, that might be sufficient to get her over the top, whereas previously Democrats needed to win by closer to certainly 3 to 4 points in order to be able to win the Electoral College vote. So in any case, it was interesting reading about this Republican self-identification. One of the things that they find in terms of driving some of these movements is just like, who's the party that holds the White House and how do people feel about that person? So if you have, George W. Bush, for example, after 9/11, he has this huge surge in popularity. And that was the last time that you even had, for a brief period, Republicans outpacing Democrats in terms of how people describe themselves because he was very popular and he was a Republican. Now, obviously, you have Joe Biden in the White House. He is very unpopular. So that has caused Democratic self-identification to take a hit. To your point, Saagar, I mean, it certainly is something that Republicans will be happy about. It gives them a little bit of a leg up and an edge going into this election. But in 2022, Democrats won independents sufficiently to overcome that edge that Republicans had at that time. So it's an interesting note, but it is not by any means determinative of what the outcome may actually be.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and put this next piece up on the screen. This is the latest New York Times poll, which finds that Kamala Harris has taken a narrow 3-point lead in the national popular vote, 49-46. The same poll last time around had the two of them tied, I believe, at 47%, if memory serves. This is the first time in this particular poll that Kamala Harris has actually led Trump since July when Biden dropped out of the race. So certainly she'll be happy with that outcome from the New York Times, which is taken very seriously, whether it deserves all of the, this is one of the ones that everybody stops and takes note of when these polls come out. She has shored up her support, they say, among older voters, has begun making inroads among Republicans. 9% say they plan to support her, up slightly from 5% last month. And she appears to have closed the gap on the question of change, a critical factor, they write, in an election where voters have repeatedly told pollsters they believe the nation is heading in the wrong direction. Put a pin in that one, because she did herself no favors this week on that question of who would be the change candidate when she could not literally name a single thing that she would do different than Joe Biden, which is like, how do you not know how to answer this question at this point? All of the polling shows that it is important to voters that she separate herself from Joe Biden. But what I took note of here is, this kind of dovetails with the idea that more people are self-identifying as Republicans. This helps to explain their Liz Cheney strategy. This is not a strategy that I would personally go forward with. I think they should be emphasizing more of their economic positions. I think they should be doing more work to close that gap with Trump on the economy and on inflation in particular in those industrial Midwestern states. But they believe that there is a sufficient majority anti-Trump coalition that the more they lean into like, oh my God, Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney endorsed us, and the less they talk about hard policy proposals that could be controversial among some Republican voters, the better off they'll be. That's their theory, is basically like, we're going to put back together the pro-Joe Biden, anti-Trump coalition, And we believe, based on the electoral results in 18 and 20 and 22, that that's enough to get us over the top. And, you know, they'll look at this and say, oh, see, it's working. Now we've got 9% of Republicans supporting us instead of 5%.
Maybe. That's an awful lot. I mean, these polls are only 1,000 people, you know, that are even the sample size. So how many is that? Like 90? It's like, are you really going to base your political theory based on that? I don't know. I mean, this is also the problem with a lot of crosstab diving is these samples are not that big. And by the way, 1,000 is actually quite big for over national poll and where they do live caller. But statistical sampling and all of that, the deeper that you try and go, it's very difficult. That's why you should try to look at averages. And ultimately, the actual outcome on Election Day will tell us a lot more. I did see this morning a possible indication from Reuters. They say that Kamala Harris has, quote, erased Republican Trump advantage in the vast middle of American society, suburban residents and middle-income households. That's basically who they're trying to go after with the Republican theory. Again, I mean,
they're going after those Nikki Haley voters.
Here's the reason, the main one that I just don't think that that is correct is that, yes, those Republicans and all that may be disgusted with Trump, but when you're also not acting as a change agent, which we're about to get to in her answer on The View, that's where I think it's going to be really difficult. Like, I also saw, Krystal, you know, remember that J.D. Vance answer about the election, and we thought it was going to be everywhere. So it turns out that those ads, Dave Weigel pointed this out, those ads don't have a lot of money behind them.
They're just like internet ads.
They're just on Twitter. They're not actually like the major ones that are playing in the battleground states. So I can tell you, like I said, I was in Pennsylvania. Every anti-Trump ad was just about abortion. And that, I mean, clearly that's something, but abortion's not going to be enough. We talked to Logan Phillips just to carry you across because it's not as prescient as in 2022. I think the economy and feeling like you're going to do something different is really important. And that answer that she gave on The View, I don't think I think that fact that the Trump campaign is now planning on blasting that everywhere, that does tell you actually quite a bit. Why don't we take a listen? I know Ryan and Emily brought some of these yesterday, but let's relive it.
What do you think would be the biggest specific difference between your presidency and a Biden presidency?
Well, we're obviously two different people, and we have a lot of shared life experiences. For example, the way we feel about our family and our parents and so on. But we're also different people, and I will bring those sensibilities to how I lead.
Yeah.
Listen, I plan on having a Republican in my cabinet.
I got a list.
Yes, right. You asked me what's the difference between Joe Biden and me. Well, that will be one of the differences. I'm going to have a Republican in my cabinet because I don't feel burdened by letting pride get in the way of a good idea.
Yeah.
Right.
So that exactly is the dynamic that we're talking about here. So, I mean, look, we'll see. We got 27 more days. We'll find out on Election Day whether she's correct. If this turns out to be the right theory, I don't know. I give up because it's like just saying, oh, Liz Cheney is going to be my Secretary of Defense, which, you know, between the Iran comments about our greatest adversary, the Liz Cheney thing, and now saying Republican in my cabinet, I think we all know who that person is going to be, or at least it's going to be somewhere there in the cabinet. And then we combine it with, I actually wouldn't change anything from the Biden administration except bringing in somebody who is way worse on national policy. If that's enough, I honestly, I don't really know what to say. But
it's also not even true that Biden doesn't have Republicans in his government. I mean, Chris Wray is a Republican, right? Aren't there other people in defense?
Like,
anyway,
what does the term even mean at this point?
So here's what I would say. I'm inclined to agree with you that they are really screwing up right now. Like, they should be leaning into economics because my view is people who are going to vote for democracy and part of the anti-Trump, like, they already know where they stand. That's why they're not running ads about J.D. Vance's answer, because it's like, yeah, those people are already locked in, right? And now we just got to turn them out. And they do have massive funds in terms of their, you know, overall operation, turnout operation. She raised $1 billion, we just learned as of yesterday, in less than 3 months' time. Like, that is unheard of, ungodly amounts of money that she's been able to raise. So they're going to have plenty of money for the field operation, whatever they want to do down the stretch, ads, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing is, like, I just am very humble at this point about what is actually going to work, because in 2022, they were doing the same, like, let's just talk about democracy and extremism and not offer literally anything on economics. In 2020, Joe Biden did not run on a single economic position, to the best of my recollection. even though he ended up, having a pretty good domestic economic agenda, but did not run on really any of that in terms of the general election. And it worked out. In 2022, I really thought, I thought like the red wave is coming. People are angry about inflation. Y'all aren't talking about it. There's people think you're on the wrong track, et cetera, et cetera. Joe Biden is already pretty unpopular. And I was wrong. So maybe they're right. Maybe it's enough. Maybe just getting together the old like anti-Trump band again. Maybe they're correct that there just is an anti-Trump majority, and the less that you promise on policy, the less divisive that you are. And if you just lean into that like generic Democrat position, maybe it's sufficient. I genuinely do not know.
Oh, I agree with you. That's my point. Is I'm like, I really hope this isn't correct, but I fear that it very much could be. Let's put this on the screen. Well, actually, at the very least, this time we're going to get a real test because what we have here from Axios is that Republicans are, again, planning to spend heavily to promote this clip saying that there's not a thing that you would do differently. I saw J.D. Vance and Trump are now playing that clip actually at their rallies. Obviously, people going to a Trump rally are already voting for Republican. But the point is that they see that as very beneficial to them. There is a significant amount of dollars behind we need an actual change in the White House. One of the areas that she's always struggled the most with is differentiating herself from Biden. And the only thing she can really come up with is I would have a Republican in my cabinet. I would also note maybe part of this is media, because Krystal, what you and I know is that even if there isn't a necessarily major constituency for this stuff, there's nobody who loves it more than Morning Joe or like MSNBC's with Nicole Wallace, this idea of a Republican in the cabinet. So it could be to get more favorable media attention. The other thing is maybe it's just what she believes. She doesn't want to do anything differently.
She does not believe anything.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
and that's part of why my theory of why she does so poorly in these interviews, and her aides were basically right. Like she shouldn't have done these interviews from just pure tactical perspective. Just don't do the interview. Send Tim Walz on. He does a fantastic job in these interview situations. But yeah, they were correct about the basement strategy. Not that I'm saying it's a good thing for democracy. It's not.
Yeah.
But in terms of tactical political decision making, they were probably right about that. But I mean, it's just because it's a lot harder to nail a interview like this when you don't believe anything, because you just have to memorize every answer versus asking yourself like, oh, well, what do I actually think about that? Let me use my brain to articulate it. It's like, oh, what am I supposed to say to this? What do my aides tell me the right answer is here? And then this was a classic Kamala moment in that it's a totally foreseeable question. Like totally foreseeable question. It should be a layup. She should be hoping to get that question so that she can knock it out of the park of the ways in which she's going to be different from Joe Biden. Like that would only serve her. And yet on this very predictable softball question, she completely whiffs. So, this is what happens when she, I don't know, the preparation fails her or her brain fails her in terms of trying to recall what her advisors want her to say in that moment. Because it's really difficult to try to memorize 1,000 different answers on things when you yourself don't really have any core beliefs to draw on and go back to. Like she doesn't have the ability to say, oh, well, how would I actually be different from Joe Biden? Because to be honest with you, if she was really answering that question truthfully, it'd be like, oh, I'm probably going to be more receptive to like the crypto bros and get rid of Gary Gensler and Lena Khan and be more friendly to Silicon Valley, to Wall Street, which I guess, as we'll get to later in the show, the Mark Cubans of the world and others would be happy about, but may not be the best general election messaging.
That's a good point. I mean, look, I think the part of the issue is I feel like in previous elections, we had a lot more either events or tentpole news. So 2020, obviously there was COVID, and that was just such a crazy environment that we were covering. Not only the attempts at rallies, but we had the traditional debates. Trump had COVID. That was all happening. Then we had the whole mail-in balloting thing ahead. This just election, especially since Kamala got picked, just feels remarkably stable to me. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but the test case and the theories put forth by both of these candidates have been effectively locked in stone. And absent, a quote-unquote October surprise of a genuine war in Lebanon and Iran, obviously the hurricane that just happened is devastating. Hopefully we don't see any major fallout or anything from that.
Yeah.
I'm hoping it doesn't change anything, but we don't yet know. But between those, I don't see anything yet. Of course, look, the Comey letter came when? October 23rd, I want to say. So we still have plenty of time that something could significantly change. In fact, I read an insane statistic. I think I talked about this with you last time. in the 2016 election, 9% of the electorate did not make up their minds until a week before the election. That is crazy to me.
We just don't, I just don't think we have that electorate anymore.
You might be right, but I'm like, wow. Like not knowing who you're going to vote for 9 days before election day and just being like, okay, yeah. I mean, I agree. It's probably less. It may not be 9, but let's say it's 4. I mean, 4 is enough. You could swing the entire thing. So there are a lot of people out there that think that way.
The other thing is, though, that we vote differently than we did in 2016. I mean, early voting and mail-in voting, was obviously spiked massively during the pandemic, and it's not going to be as high as the levels in 2020. But it's not going back to 2016 either. So you'd almost need more of like a September surprise than an October surprise. And we've had a lot of surprises in this race so far. And after Joe Biden is out, everything that's happened since then, maybe the polls tick 1 point this way or 1 point that way. But overall, it is just really stable. And the steady, stable place it is Kamala hovering with maybe about a 3-point lead in the popular vote, which is translates into every swing state effectively being tied and within the margin of error. So, it's really a question of, are the polls accurate? Are they, are they missing some dynamic? That's the other thing that Nate Cohn has been talking about, is some of the pollsters, they're very worried about understating Republican support and Trump support again, right? Because they really blew it. They famously blew it in 2016, but they actually were more wrong in 2020.
Yeah, that's correct.
They were more off. It's just that Joe Biden still had enough of an edge to win, so they didn't get quite as much backlash as 2016, but they were actually more wrong in 2020. And so some of the pollsters who've been burned by that have adopted this practice, which was previously seen as bad polling practice, where they weight the voter sample based on how people self-report who they voted for last time. People are not reliable, actually, even about who they voted for in the last election. And without getting into the technical details of this, the impact of using that method as for weighting the electorate is that you're likely to overstate the amount of support for the last loser of the election. But they feel like, okay, but we've gotten it so wrong so many times. We need to juice Trump's numbers so that we don't have a similar miss again. Now, if you look at the pollsters who are doing that versus the pollsters who are not doing that, and by the way, the New York Times, where Nate Cohn is one of the pollsters that is not doing that, the results in most cases are not all that much different. But the subtle difference is that the pollsters who are using that, weighting based on self-identification method, their polls are sort of mirroring what happened in 2020. And using that method is likely to get you to basically mirror the last results of the last election. And the New York Times polls and other ones that aren't using that method, they're seeing more shifts that look more like the 2022 midterm elections. That's why you end up with the New York Times poll of Florida being a 13-point lead for Donald Trump, where other polls have shown it actually quite close, being 3 points, even 2 points, 4 points, more in the single digits versus 13 points. So Nate's point is basically I understand, I'm sympathetic to why pollsters are doing this, but if you are using this method, you may be missing some shift that has happened post-2020. And I don't think any of us would be surprised, especially given what we saw in the 2022 midterms and how that was such a different election in terms of some places the red wave did actually materialize, but in a lot of key swing states, it did not and went in the other direction. The map in the country looks a lot different than it did pre-pandemic. So in any case, that's something else to watch out for.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.